governance and debt management, legislative budget and research, national.
Honorable colleagues, my name remains Honorable Babangida Ibrahim, representing Malumfashi, Kafur Federal Constituency. I'm from Cttees State. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, I do move that the House do consider the report of Committee on Finance, Appropriation, Aid, Debt and Loan, Research, National Planning and Economic Development on 2019-2021 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper. I so move, Mr. Speaker.
Consider reports. I so move.
Those in research, national planning, economic development on the 2019-2021 medium-term expenditure framework (MTEF) and fiscal strategy paper (FSP). I invite Honorable Babangida Ibrahim to give the synopsis of the report.
The 2019-2021 medium-term expenditure and fiscal strategy paper was designed in line with 2017 to 2020 economic recovery and growth plan. The committee met with all the relevant agencies, Minister of National Planning, Minister of Finance, Civilian Governor, FIRS, NNPC, DPR, Custom, and other relevant revenue-generating agencies. The committee received presentation by all those key stakeholders, and the following are the summary of the 2019 federal government revenue and expenditure framework. The daily production of oil is 2.3 million barrels per day. Benchmark price, $60 per barrel. Exchange rate is 305 per USD. GDP growth rate is 3%. Inflation growth rate 9.98%. Total federal collectible revenue 14.89 trillion naira. Net oil and gas revenue after cost deductions and gradations is 7.6 trillion naira. Net oil revenue after cost and deductions 2.38 trillion naira. FGN return revenue is 7.92 trillion. Federal government proposed expenditure is 8.83 trillion. Fiscal deposit is put at 1.86 trillion naira. Net borrowing 1.6 trillion. Statutory transfer 4.492.4 billion. Debt servicing is 2.14 trillion. Sinking fund 120 billion naira. Pension gratuity retirement benefits is 504.3 billion naira. Aggregate expenditure is 10.33 trillion. Total recurrent non-debt is 4.72 trillion. Personnel cost MDAs is 2.23 trillion. Capital expenditure exclusive of transfers is 2.86 trillion naira. Special intervention recurrent 350 billion, and special intervention capital stand at 150 billion naira. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the committee recommends on key assumptions of 2019-2021 MTEP and FPSP as follows. The crude production average as of December 2018 at 2 million barrels per day. The committee therefore recommends, as proposed, 2.3 billion barrels per day as production output for crude oil in 2019. Also on crude benchmark price, the price of crude as at August 2018 stands at $71.8 per barrel, which has later on towards the end of the year started nosediving to below $60 per barrel. And it has started increasing at the first quarter of 2019. Therefore, the committee recommends the adoption of USD $60 per barrel as benchmark price for 2019 fiscal year budget. Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues, the exchange rate has been 305 per dollar for almost close to 10 years now. The committee has raised issue with the Civilian Governor or the representative of CBN asked why is it that we continue to maintain 305 for close to 10 years. So the committee advised Central Bank of Nigeria to set up a technical committee and look at the possibility of reviewing the exchange rate of 305 per dollar. The committee, at the end of the day, also adopts the 305 naira per dollar as official exchange rate for 2019 fiscal year. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues, the debt and management and new borrowing proposed, as at June 30th, Nigerian total debt stood at 22.38 trillion naira, equivalent to $73.213 billion, while the ratio of debt to GDP stands at 18.35%, which is still below the self-imposed debt limit of total public debt to GDP ratio of 25%, and far below the World Bank's debt subsidiarity threshold of 6% of Nigeria and other peer countries. The committee therefore recommends the fiscal year forecast deposits at 1.86 trillion naira as debt to cover the deficit in the 2019 budget. The committee recommends adoption of 1.6 trillion as borrowing to fund the budget deficit as advised, and also advise relevant agencies, revenue collecting agencies, to also improve on their revenue generation performance. The federal government also should consider reducing granting of waivers and exemptions so as to improve the inflow of revenue. On special intervention funds, what was proposed is 350 on recurrent and 150 on capital. The joint committee recommends the 500 billion special intervention fund to be adopted, and also a joint cooperation and relevant committee and other relevant MDAs to ensure that the funds are judiciously utilized to provide positive and tangible impact to the fund on the Nigerian populace. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, honorable colleagues, the joint committee expressed their appreciation to the House and the leadership for the privilege and opportunity to serve in the Hollow Chamber and by extension our beloved country, Nigeria. Thank you very much.
Of crude oil in 2019, and it is of the view that the target is achievable due to the continuous effort of all stakeholders, checkmating the issues of oil facilities, vandalism, and other vices associated with such. Okay, so that's the recommendation we're taking.
I'll take it on next borrowing.
Okay. So recommendation 1, carried. So we now move to recommendation 2, which is on page 13. This would the committee recommends the adoption of USD 60 as crude benchmark price for the 2019 fiscal year budget. For the 2019 fiscal year budget. Is that what you want to contribute on? The benchmark?
Yeah, I want to talk on the deficit budget.
Pardon? On benchmark. Page.
So what I'm trying to say, what is the point of we set up parameter here, at the end of the day, government does not use it? We all know that the one we set for last year was never used throughout. So how can our Committee of Finance liaise with the Ministry of Finance so that whatever agreement that is reached on the Naira exchange rate, that should be what we should use, because it will help the economy. But when you now go to do different differentials, you give some higher exchange rate, some lower exchange rate, whereas it's all official. It destroys the economy.
For close to 10 years now. We spoke with the representative of the CBN, our concern, and we advise them because it's purely CBN matters. This issue, year in, year out, there has been a lot of complaints about maintaining 305. It's purely technical matter that is handled by CBN. So we advise them to form a committee that will review this 305 because some concerns were raised even as to at what point do they use 305. 305 is only used when it comes to the issue of conversion of revenue from foreign exchange to Naira. But if it comes to other business dealings, they don't even use 305. It's open to interbank exchange rates. So this issue was raised, and we advise them that they should try as much as possible to look at the possibility of reviewing the 305 exchange rate because it has been there for close to 10 years. Thank you.
5 when it's going into the treasury. But when we're selling the dollars, we sell it at more than 305. So what happens to the difference?
That's why I think it is the responsibility of the Parliament in the next assembly to look at this area of.
Recommendation 3 carried. Recommendation 4. Adoption of 1.64 trillion as new borrowing to fund budget deficit. There are 2 recommendations there, 4.1 and 4.2. 4.1 is the adoption of 1.64 trillion as a new borrowing to fund the budget deficit. Betty, Honorable.
Taking a look at the adoption of the nation total debt stands at 22.38 trillion as at today, and the recommendation is to adopt 1.64 trillion as the new borrowing to fund the budget deficit. We are sitting down in this National Assembly, and year in, year out, our debt profile is going high. I think we need to ask some questions about how we have managed the revenues we receive. Mr. Speaker, I would have preferred if this document had said something about what we are doing with fuel subsidy money. Trillions of naira is being spent on fuel subsidy, which is absolutely unacceptable. And it has not been made open. It's all shrouded in secrecy. We don't know who is importing fuel, who is being paid what. This document, if it was to do justice to the funding of this budget, should have told us how much we are spending on fuel subsidy and how we intend to mitigate the high expense on fuel subsidy to use. Before you go borrowing, you should first of all ask yourself questions about how you have utilized the fundings you have. And I think we need to address that issue critically before we go throwing the nation into this kind of debt that may be impossible for us to get out of.
So, what are we borrowing to fund? Are we borrowing to fund capital or recurrent? If possible, and I think it's doable, we should even tie borrowing to specific projects. So, are we borrowing to fund recurrent or capital?
By virtue of the provisions of fiscal recurrent items, it's only for capital, and that's the law passed by this Parliament. So that matter is settled. Yes. So, okay, Honorable Abiente.
It won't change anything, but let it just be on record. You see, we're already spending 2.14 trillion to service already incurred debts. And we flaunt it around that we have a budget that is about 9 trillion naira. We are still going to borrow more, and this will be serviced. And the servicing will start probably tomorrow, I don't know. So we'll be having budgets that seem to be very large with components of debt servicing that are quite outrageous. We are not doing ourselves any good. And some of these monies that have been borrowed have not been very transparent in utilization. We have to be very frank to ourselves. So we should advise the executive arm to be a lot more cautious in borrowing. And they should apply whatever resources we have judiciously. It's just an observation. It won't change anything, I know. Thank you.
The present public debt to GDP is 18.something%, which is far below the 25% self-imposed public debt to GDP ratio. And I want to draw the attention of my colleagues. You see, the issue of 1.6.4 borrowing is just for the budgets. It's a deficit we have from the difference between the revenue, expected revenue, and the expected expenditure. So, like the chairman has said, the funding is just on capital portion of the budget. It has nothing to do with the aggregate debt of the nation. It's specifically to cover deficit on 2019 budget. Thank you.
People of Mango Bokas. So, Chairman, I want to also reiterate more on the issue of the debt servicing in our budget, which is 2.42 trillion. and we are having this borrowing again to adopt it to about 1.6 trillion. And we're talking about our GDP, which is even self-imposed. It's not driven by economic factors that are, it should be driven by the economic parameters that are already existent. These are self-imposed things, and I don't see them having impact. My concern and worry now is that at the end of this, if you look at our capital budget, which is 1.8 trillion, if you remove this from the capital budget of 1.8 trillion, you have less than 200 million as our capital expenditure. And this is very, very worrisome. And there is a need for us to look at what point are we going to reduce this in order to increase our capital expenditure? Because that's the only thing that will create employment in our country. Otherwise, we are not seeing the effect of many of this borrowing, and then the repayment plans are so huge on them. So I think the committee should have dug deep to tell us what will be the expected debt servicing that we may be expecting in the next budget that will come out if we have this borrowing added to it. Because if you deduct this again from our capital, our revenues that are coming in, and then you take away the capital, which is 1.8 trillion, you have less than 200 million as our capital expenditure for the year. So it's very worrisome. I think there's need for us to look at these issues very well so that we know exactly under what parameters are we approving some of these subject matters, so that we will be guided properly, so that we do not lead Nigeria again into another situation in this house.
So we are servicing our debt obligations. So there is the difference between debt servicing and borrowing to finance deficits. Everything we are paying on debt servicing is a loan approved by this house. We approve it. So we should turn off every please. Thank you.
Last year's borrowing and the implementation of capital budget. We are, as I've been in this house for some years, I'm aware, at best, capital budget financing does not go beyond 50, at best 60%. So if our capital budget for 2019 is 1.8, we are borrowing 1.6 trillion. Are we sure that we will finance 2019 capital component of our budget to the tune of about 80%? That is just what I think we need to educate ourselves on more. Maybe next time we should have a bit of information to educate some of us so that we know.
As a member of this committee that is laying this report, again coming to raise issues, does it mean that they didn't work as a committee? I thought if he offended and is part of it, he should be defending the report, not criticizing the report. Thank you very much, sir.
Complaining, this is what they want to spend, and this is what our revenue can cater for. If the revenue improve, TJ and my honorable colleagues, nobody is saying that government must borrow such amount. So the first we need to put this country into is for our revenue to improve. If the revenue improve today, nobody will go out and borrow. And this borrowing we are talking about, we are still within the safest zone. We didn't go out of the safest zone. We are still within the limit the country is supposed to borrow. So let's pray that we'll have an improved revenue generation drive in the country, so that we didn't even go out and borrow.
About the fact that we're going to approve this document. But in approving this document, we must have issues at the back of our minds that we have to address. We must have issues at the back of our minds that we have to address in order to guide our economy properly. You know, all of us are aware that we are implementing the new minimum wage. And this has not been imputed in this budget. So that's an additional expense that is going to come to throw us into more financial stress. So we're not saying we're not going to approve this document, but it's important that this House is properly guided when we are making recommendations and how you're discussing with the MDAs when they make these presentations to you. That's the issue we're all trying to make. It's not as if, because I've heard what my honorable colleague said about TJ. It's not as if we're not going to approve this, because of course we have to approve the budget, but the point still remains that this issue...
Generating agencies should be encouraged, put more effort to generate more revenue. So we are hoping at the end of the day, we may need it to borrow. And one thing we should note, like I said earlier, as a house or as a National Assembly, most of what we are servicing on our debt are approved by us. So when any presentation is made on debt or whatever, I think we can bring the debate on issue of whether we are within acceptable limit or otherwise. But for this purpose, it's a proposal to finance deficit. We may not even...
What is uppermost from the contribution, what I could garner is that if the entire capital expenditure, for instance, 1.8 billion, we're borrowing 1.6 to finance budget deficit. It means that we're only committing 200 billion of revenue for capital. So assuming if we were not borrowing at all, the maximum that we can deploy for capital projects from national receipts, federal receipts, is just 200 billion. You understand? That is the implication. Now, in terms of revenue agencies even improving their drive to generate more revenue, we know that it has always been projection. Even this revenue they are projecting that we'll realize, most of those agencies, as you know, the practice has been over time, is that they will underperform. They will not meet their targets. So most likely, we may not even generate the revenues as such. So, but the presumption here is even if all those agencies meet their targets, assuming they meet their projected targets in the budget, we still have 1.8, 1.6 billion deficit that we need to finance. And that is why we must borrow. So the only issue is we have to look at whether it is proper going forward for us to be devoting only 200 billion of national receipts for capital in the budget and then borrowing the balance to finance capital. That is one issue. But the safety is that there is an acceptable, internationally acceptable norm of the debt to GDP ratio not exceeding a particular threshold. And that threshold, I think, is between 24 to 25%. So since this is a thing, we're still very, very, very safe within the threshold. We don't have any headache, as it were, because by international standard, it's still okay for us to go ahead and borrow. But the only question is whether it's sustainable going forward that only 200 billion of our national revenue we will be devoting daily to capital projects and funding the deficit through loan. That's just the aspect that we need to cure. And so we need to work on the revenue generating agencies to increase their capacity, deploy more tools, technology to ensure that they rein in more revenue so that we can escape from this trap. So I guess that's just the point being made.
Yes. Correct an impression. We have personnel costs, we have recurrent, and we have capital. And in the course of implementing the budget, there is nowhere you will see capital or recurrent implemented 100%. So the budget is implemented on both structures, personnel, recurrent, and capital, as the revenue is inflow. Most of our colleagues can bear with me that during budget defense, you will see the performance of recurrent is mostly 50, 60, 70%. So what we are saying is that in total,
resolution on a motion where we say it's mere persuasive, but the language of 4.2 appears to be a little bit beggarly. I think that whatever decision we arrive at on issues of budget and MTEF should be binding. You say the federal government should consider reducing the granting of waivers and exemptions. And what one would also ask is, what is the quantum of waivers and exemptions that we have presently? And then to what extent are we asking for this reduction so that we should be a little bit more specific? Then aside that, if you also look at the second limb, where we say the Federal Inland Revenue Service should consider increasing tax on luxury goods and services. One will also wonder whether FIRS has the powers to increase taxes without recourse to the National Assembly. So if we are now asking them to consider that, if we have the powers to increase or reduce taxes, are we not giving up those powers by asking them to consider increasing these taxes and levies on goods? So I think that we need to rejig this 4B. That's my submission.
We encouraging the Federal Inland Revenue Service to consider increasing taxes
You see, Mr. Chairman, what we mean is that we have the power to finally increase taxes. So what we mean is that FRS has a technical committee. They have to look at the economic environment and look at the timing before they make a proposal. What we mean by increase is to propose to the National Assembly. We're not saying that they should just go ahead and unilaterally increase taxes. You know, what we are talking about, recently there has been a lot of agitation on increasing of VAT to 10%. And what we are saying is that instead of still maintaining a flat rate of 10% VAT, we should discriminate like what is obtainable in other countries. That's why we say they should look at possibilities on increasing VAT on luxury goods. So which means we are only saying that they should look at the possibilities, discriminate, instead of having a flat VAT rate, let us discriminate between luxury and basic goods so that they can propose for our consideration. That's what we
I would just suggest that we add to that statement that the Inland Revenue Service should consider increasing tax on luxury goods and services subject to the approval of the Parliament. Probably that's
Sufficient enough. As a parliament, if you go to other nations, you find out the budget is funded through tax and revenue. Mr. Chairman, sir, what you are saying by increasing tax, there are luxury goods which until today, the tax they are paying is not sufficient enough. When you take when you look at soft drinks like Coca-Cola, there are taxes they are running away from. Tobacco, just now somebody sponsored a motion that we should tax the issue of tobacco in Nigeria. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Chairman, sir, honorable colleague, if we feel we don't need more revenue or more tax in Nigeria, I am moving that we should lead this part of the recommendation so that we can go at the place we are going.
The challenges we have in developing world is the issue of taxes. Really, we think that taxes put revenue on the table and it can, empower us to be able to deal with debt crisis. But unfortunately, it does the opposite of what we think the taxes do. If you overtax your citizens, chances are that there will be no capacity to accumulate capital. And when you cannot accumulate capital, you cannot invest. You cannot set up small and medium scale enterprises, and then it tells a lot on job opportunities. You understand? But lower taxes help in terms of capital accumulation in countries. When you accumulate capitals, you go into ventures. You can go into farming, you can go into processing this thing, and then taxes now increase while you build local capacity, employ more people. You understand? But taxes are not normally the best way of addressing some of these challenges that we're talking about.
This morning, sir, on tobacco, which we all unanimously agreed to pass that one, that there should be tax so that we're going to discourage. These are luxury that we do not necessarily need that. And I don't know how many factories produce tobacco in this country. And to the contrary, whoever is picking tobacco knows that he's doing a lot of harm to his own health. This we shall be doing a lot of good. Mr. Speaker, I want to believe there are a lot of luxury items that are brought into this country that we do not require. I saw a video of what you are doing in your farm, trending, which is very much encouraging. And I believe that people like that should not be. But where somebody is going to import, for instance, fish for the birds that were produced in this country, we should put a high tax to encourage local farmers to produce so that we discourage that. And through that, we are going to generate a lot of money, Speaker, that could possibly save the situation in the country. I want to believe that there are luxury items that we do not necessarily require, those that we can deal with within the country, and the waivers that are being given day in, day out, unnecessary waivers. These are areas that we can also increase our revenue generation in the country that will service of our project requirements. Thank you very much, sir.
That when you look at most of our laws, and I must of course thank the 8th Assembly under our leadership, where we looked at laws that are obsolete, you find that a lot of laws that are even based on tax are obsolete. And a lot of these major organizations are using it to to cut away with billions of naira that will come to Nigeria. An example can be cited with the pioneer incentive, where you find out that one of the things that is given waiver for is profitable tax. So you find out that you have a lot of multinational companies that do not pay education tax because they're exempt from accessible profit. They don't pay company tax, and a lot of them that are producing things that are not vatable are not paying VAT. So at the end of the day, they are making billions in naira and are not paying any tax at all. So to me, the focus should be shifted away from increasing tax. And if my mind suits me correctly, things like tobacco, and that's why you have the warning, smokers are liable to die young. What we're trying to discourage is actually we're trying to promote the health benefit of not smoking by higher taxes, not necessarily the fact that we want to make more money for this country. So to this end, if you reduce tax, which in a lot of places, there's what we call economics of scale in economics, where you reduce tax, you have much more players in the industry, and when you have much more, the level of income actually increases. So it's something that must be subject to detailed analysis. But as a country, at this point, what I believe we should be looking at is reviewing our tax laws, especially those that are obsolete and have given a lot of loops where a lot of people are taking advantage of, to close them up and realize as much income as possible. Even things that are exempt from tax should be reconsidered very strongly. When you go through it, you will find out that only food items is tax exempt. But you find out that people are hiding under that clause to say things like biscuit are tax exempt. So what we really need to do is to shift our focus to reappraising the laws on tax, putting the necessary stop gaps so that our tax income is much higher than to be putting effort on the tax that is being charged. And I believe it will make up for whatever deficit we need in this country.
Situation. I think the argument is about widening the base, tax base, rather than increasing tax. But what is in contention there is the way it is couched. The contention is the way it is couched, not, that's my opinion. One, the emphasis on luxury goods. And what's important for colleagues, I myself be saying that we should say in line with the, enabling laws, so as to tie the, as well, they won't take this as if the parliament is giving them go ahead to do without the input of the parliament. And then the first part that the Babangida referred to is the first part of the section, the amendment 2, that we should consider reducing. They said it's too beggarly. That it should be that reduce, not consider reducing. We should emphasize that they should reduce granting of waiver, rather than say consider. So I think these are the things in contention, the way it is couched.
To increase the tax. But the purpose of the approving the MTF, I think the concern raised is what the Cttees have just said. Everybody will agree. Without increasing the tax, we cannot have more revenue. It's acceptable everywhere. But for the purpose of this is to recap, I've given the power of the National Assembly back to the FRS. So in line with the position of the law, so they can go ahead and do whatever they want to do for the purpose of this MTF. If we want to consider consideration of the more tax to our law, then we can bring it back to the Parliament for the consideration. Thank you.
What is important here is to look at the intent of the drafters of this recommendation. And I also want to most politely inform the House that this report we are considering is a harmonized version between the Senate and the House of Representatives. And going to look at the deep and expanded meaning of each word used here might make us, and I know the Parliament has set a time for itself to complete this assignment. And Senate has passed yet. So for whatever it may mean, I don't think there's a mischief, in my opinion, here. Rather, the intention is the word consider or not. I think we should play it down at this point and take it up another day where we'll have a proper deal or motion before us. That's my consideration.
in this report, more so that it's already been harmonized with the other house. Any variation may result into going to conference, and truly we don't have the time. Maybe the next house may want to look at the issue of tax regime in Nigeria and address it holistically. But the truth is that except we're not running by the provisions of the Constitution, no proposal for tax increment will be executed without first passing through the House of the People. So it will still come to the two chambers of the National Assembly before it is ultimately given effect to. But I want to give information in respect of this very wonderful recommendation that was made that the Nigerian Customs Service personnel should ensure that there are all terminals for accountability. I was chairman House Committee on Customs. This has been a very serious problem in this country, and the law requires that before the export of any crude, custom personnel, in conjunction with the Department of Weigh and Measures of the Ministry of Trade, must issue a form called NPEX. I don't know if the chairman custom who is seated there has worked on this. And then the law further says that without the NPEX, no export shall take place. But the truth is that you cannot find customs, you cannot find any officials of the Department of Weigh and Measures of the Ministry of Trade at the export terminals. In those days, any attempt for them to access it is blocked by the Navy. And it was a serious problem, and I believe it's still the case right now. So at the end of the day, we discovered in the course of that investigation that there's an industry-wide practice called topping. So that means if your allocation is to leave like 100,000 barrels, maybe 10,000 barrels is added. So it's called topping, and there's a way the proceeds of the topping is shared. Somebody even came and led that before the committee. So we discovered that in the Sixth Assembly, shouted, worked on it, but it's never been corrected. So this is a very wonderful suggestion. I hope that the government will be able to implement this to ensure that the custom officials take their place there, and the officials of the department, Weigh and Measures Department of the Ministry of Trade, are there to issue the NPEX forms before the exports take place. If that can be done, I'm telling you, we'll save a lot of revenue. But unfortunately, that's not the case. So this is a very wonderful recommendation, and I doff my cap for the committee for picking this. So recommendation 4.2 carried, 5 carried.
I hereby move that the House do revert to plan to report, progress. I so move.
We had an acting deputy leader who was always challenging the leader in economic development 2019 to 2021 medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF, and fiscal strategy paper, FSP, and approved recommendations 1 to 5 of the report.